So now we've got the elements of our track down and we've got the song structure more or less there. We are going to start looking at layering and then the mixing stage, and we'll also go into how to create the intro and the outro in a bit more depth as well. So the general idea is to get the sounds matching out of the gate as well as possible in the sound design stage before having to rely on mixing and things like that. Layering is a great way to get the sounds that you want, but the closer you can get to what you want earlier on, the easier the mixing stage is going to be. So if we start looking through the processing chains of our elements, well, firstly, we looked at the kick. These elements here, well, we can take the spectrum off because we don't need it now. But these elements here are for transitions, which we're going to look into just kind of after or during the mixing stage, because some of them actually inform some of the mixing as well. But the first thing to look at most noticeably would be the bass. As I've said before, I like to layer my bass with a sub bass and a mid bass as well. And the great thing about layering these two basses are that you kind of want everything below about 130, 140 hertz to be mono anyway, because you can start running into phase cancellation issues and other things. So being able to have the sub bass nice and mono right in the center channel means that you can then play with the mid bass a little bit more. For instance, if we use a plugin like Ozone. Now there are other steps you can use to do this instead of using an expensive plugin, but I'm just going to use the Ozone Imager. Like one of the steps would be a Haas effect, but if we see here, or if we listen rather, this shows that the bass is completely mono. We could actually press the stereoize button and suddenly make our bass nice and stereo. But beneath 140, we wanted all mono anyway, so that's great as it is. And what that sounds like with the other bass. So that's without any stereo width on the upper bass, and that's with stereo bass. So let's listen with the kick. And check, it sounds just as good in mono. And it does. So in terms of layering the bass, before adding the stereo width, I've rolled off some of these lower bass frequencies to allow the sub bass to breathe through. You could actually do a high roll on the sub bass to make sure that it's not clashing with that upper bass, but I know that they're low frequencies there anyway, so I don't need to. So layered together, you can hear that's a really nice big fat bass sound, whereas each one of them on their own just wouldn't give you that. So with layering, you basically want to look at layering of frequency, layering of transients, and layering of stereo image. And I'll explain each of those. So with the frequency, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. We can see here that I've taken out the the lower sub frequencies so that there's room for the sub bass, and they're not going to be clashing frequency wise. In terms of transients, now this isn't always the case, and I haven't done it with the bass in particular, but with some other sounds, you might want to have a staccato sharp sound as one of the layers, and then a slower kind of more legato smoother sound as one of the other layers, so that each layer is doing a specific job. You never want to just be layering up sounds for the sake of it, because your headroom is precious, and the more frequencies you are having taken up, the quieter your final master is going to be. So it's important to choose your layers wisely.